We're hoping to start to create the conditions for a new way of funding journalism in New Zealand. At the moment, we basically are facing a sort of a crisis with no real solutions in sight, and so the idea is to begin to start experimenting with those solutions. There is charitable money available, but a lot of it's locked up in organisations which can only provide it to philanthropic entities, and currently there are no philanthropic entities involved in journalism that can really very easily take on that task.
Tell me how exactly the New Zealand news media is under threat.
Print media has ever declining revenue numbers, and their new digital revenue streams are growing, but they're not growing nearly fast enough to convince anybody that they will be capable of supporting the news operations that the existing media companies have. We have seen downsizing in newsrooms continuously since I started in journalism more than 25 years ago. So, I mean, I think I arrived at the Dominion about in the late 1980s, and we had the first round of redundancy, I think, 6 months after I arrived. And there's been rounds of redundancies at all the major newspapers pretty much every year, 2 years or so thereafter, ever since.
And how can the Media Foundation contribute in reversing the trend?
We don't really expect to be able to reverse the trend. We are mainly seeking to try and preserve some of the culture and some of the professional standards which lie behind the practice of journalism, because they don't really exist in textbooks and they don't exist in institutions. The culture of journalism is something which really previously existed in newsrooms, and fairly soon we won't have them anymore.
Yeah, what is your fear for the next coming decades when it comes to New Zealand news media?
I have a reasonable level of hope that in the next 4 or 5 years we will see some enlightened government action in this area, and perhaps the creation of some organisations which provide some basic levels of democratic media coverage. But in the absence of proper media holding governments to account, you see public officials and politicians' understandings of the rule of law and how they are supposed to behave eroded. We're already seeing that. We're already seeing officials who seem to have very little knowledge of what is to be expected of them. And this government is showing a lot of evidence of not really understanding what the limits are on their ability to try and obfuscate and refuse to answer questions about matters of public policy. These people are our servants, and the people who are empowered with questioning them and questioning their authority is this group of people that we call journalists, who don't really have, who are increasingly under threat, I suppose, is really the issue.
Alison McCulloch is the co-spokesperson of the Scoop Foundation project. I asked her what contribution the New Media Foundation can make for the New Zealand news media.
I think it can, we hope, help foster an in-depth investigative journalism because of the strains on the media at the moment. That is one area that is really suffering at the moment.
And you have been working overseas, and how would you describe the New Zealand news media compared to other countries?
I think because New Zealand is, for example, I was in the United States, and there's a philanthropic tradition there. There are a lot of big foundations that can support some media. Because of the economies of scale, New Zealand is so much smaller, it's really a lot harder to support in-depth journalism here. So I think we've got, in some ways, a harder row to hoe for example, the United States and probably also the UK, where there are some foundations that are up and running.
With the current development of New Zealand news media, where do you think it's headed?
I think the news media is in complete turmoil, and anyone who thinks they know where it's headed, well, they're more knowledgeable than I am. I really don't know where it's headed, but I think one thing one can do is to try to keep to, I guess, the foundations of good journalism and plant the seed for something that could be good. It will change, it will keep changing, but if you have something there, that can change too, but we have to do it now.
And do you think this new foundation can help to reverse the situation?
I hope so. I mean, as I said, things are changing so fast, it's hard to know, what impact it can have. But, if nothing else, maybe it can give people a bit of hope, it can provide a bit of direction, people have somewhere to look to a possible future, so that's all good.